So without further ado, welcome everyone today in the room, but also welcome online. I have the great honour today of asking Pastor Ray Minikin to come and give us an acknowledgement of country to start us off. Ray, apart from being a very respected elder and pastor in the community, has just been appointed on our advisory council as well.
Been pushed out of the Constitution again. But I want to declare that all Indigenous peoples are entitled, as against the whole world, to possession, occupation, use and enjoyment of the lands of their ancestors. It's not your ancestors, your people. I want to declare also that all Indigenous peoples are not outsiders or foreigners in their own lands. They are the descendants of the first peoples of their country, the original inhabitants, and they are to be recognised as such. I want to also declare that none of the events of invasion, settlement, federation, or the advent of foreign citizenship laws have displaced the unique position of Indigenous peoples with their lands. I want to also declare that Indigenous peoples have a unique connection to their country. It's not just ancestry, a place of birth, or even both. Indigenous peoples have a connection with the land, waters and skies under Indigenous laws and customs. And no imposed Citizenship Act has removed or modified that connection. No parliament or foreign government has removed or modified that connection by any other laws or legislation. And so on behalf of our people here in Australia, I can say that we meet here today at the Edmund Rice Centre, and we acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, in particular the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, as the first and traditional custodians of the land on which this building. And we acknowledge our gratitude that we share this land today, our sorrow for the cost of that sharing, and I hope that we can move towards a place of justice and partnership together. Welcome, my friend.
I would like to introduce our very, very special guest today, the Honourable, His Excellency, the Honourable Anote Tong, former President of Kiribati, but really someone who has a rich history that some may or may not be as much aware of, but you know, came as part of a generation that took on the mantle of responsibility in the post-independence era. Many of them very, very young, put into very important roles at a very young age. And it wasn't just in Kiribati, it was in places like Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, and other areas. My parents were lecturers at the University of Papua New Guinea and saw many of these young people come through the university at that time and take on these important roles and responsibilities. And it's a heavy burden to bear at such a young age. But you've also done so much over your career, Anote, and I just wanted to just quickly talk a little bit before handing over to you about this. The way we'll do the event today is Anote will talk for around 15 minutes.
5-10 minutes.
5-10 minutes, okay. And then I'll have a couple of questions, and then we'll open to the floor and also online for people to because Anote is very keen on hearing from everyone as well. So thank you again. So Anote was born in Tabua Eran Island, which is part of the Line Islands in Kiribati. He was educated in New Zealand and eventually the UK at LSE with a degree in science from Canterbury and then a Master's of Economics from LSE. Married to Meme, who's we're very pleased to have Meme here today. Between them, they have 7 children. His eldest, Vincent, has taken on his father's followed his father's footsteps into politics, and we look to see what he will be doing in future. But we're very interested. Anote was president of Kiribati from 2003 to 2016, before retiring and taking up his ongoing roles as a climate advocate and as a leader for the environment, not just for the Pacific and Kiribati, but internationally as well. He's also a member and current chair of the Pacific Elders Voice, which is a very important elder statespersons grouping in the Pacific, and has become very active in being able to speak to some of the big issues facing the region at this time. And it is something which we're very, very pleased to have an association with the PEV and continue to work very closely with PV going forward. Once described as a Mahatma Gandhi of the Pacific, which I only found out when I did a bit of searching today. Anote is a leader and someone who is a long-term friend of the Edmund Rice Centre. And so without further ado, Anote, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alapit, for that such an elaborate introduction. Let me begin by acknowledging the owners and the elders of the land, and in the process ask for their blessing as we have this conversation. I also would like to begin, as we normally do in our traditional interactions, with what we do is we bless each other. So when you meet, before you start, you say, you know, I bless you. And in my language, I'm Maori, may you be blessed. But I would ask you to bless me back simply by saying Maori. So let me bless you. Come to Maori.
Maori.
Thank you. Okay, on these discussions like this, I don't always know where to begin because I've been at this for a couple of decades now. And but let me give you some background as what got me started doing this. When I came into office in 2003, and as I was heading off to New York for the United Nations General Assembly, I wondered what could I be speaking about, because the total focus of the international community was on international terrorism. And so as I was going, I said, what else can we talk about? And then I came across the report of the earlier reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And within the report, there was these words, sea level rise, okay? And so immediately that set off alarm in my mind, and the reason is because Kiribati, like the other countries in the Pacific, a number of other countries in the Pacific, including Tonga, have islands which are atolls. Atolls are very narrow strips of land that top the submerged seamounts. Okay, and so we say that on average they're about 2 meters above sea level, but that's not true. They're actually much, much lower. During the highest tide, and I have some pictures of what happened during the tides in early last year. And what happens is the waves are always coming over the top. Just last week, during the new moon, the islands of the Marshall Islands, they were flooded. And the homes were that much water inside the homes. And there's nothing you can do. You just have to wait until the tide recedes. And that happened last weekend. It happened in the islands of the Marshall Islands. The airfields were flooded, damaged. Also in Tuvalu. We were running back because our home is actually on the water. It's and fortunately the tide was it's coming over, but not. It was calm. There was no wind, and so we didn't suffer what we did previously. And so this is happening, and it's got to be understood. I remember speaking in one occasion, and people say, being smart, they say, "Why don't you move back?" I said, if we move back, we fall off on either side. And so that really indicates how vulnerable we are. And so my very first inaugural statement at the United Nations in 2000 General Assembly in 2004, I spoke about climate change as a danger to our society, a danger to humanity, really. And nobody else talked. And I remember coming back wondering if I made a fool of myself. Am I panicking over a non-issue? And but fortunately, the following year, my colleagues from the region, the Pacific region, started talking, and it built up momentum. until it came from different other countries started coming in. And it was a good thing to focus international attention because this is a global problem. There was no way we can address it on our own. And so it began to build momentum, but I think the problem was the people who really need to hear the story are not listening. Over the years, we keep talking about this at home because we see it as a real danger. And it's not imagined, not anymore. The reports of the IPCC and other scientific reports are confirming that. In the 2007, in the fourth assessment report of the IPCC, they said we have up to the end of the century to remain as a viable nations. Now, in the sixth assessment report, which came out in 2022, I think, that's been upgraded to 2060. So 2060 now, our islands will be uninhabitable. But as you can see, things are already happening that might indicate that it might be soon. But I think the reality is, if we continue to do what we're doing as a global community, it's going to happen soon. Because those reports have already also indicated that even if greenhouse gas emissions were cut to zero today, the momentum of what's already in the atmosphere will continue to push global temperatures and sea level to rise. And so that is the future we face. And so the question as to, I'm also a member of the Climate Overshoot Commission. And so we talk, they're mostly from Europe and so we mustn't overshoot. And I say, no, we've already overshot. We've already overshot. So what we need to focus on is what to do with those people for whom climate change has already overshot their tipping points. Because we're not getting there. We already have overshot. And so the question is, what do you do? I've agonized over this for many, many years. And there are times when I've given up, maybe a nose, when I say, well, I'm not traveling anymore, I'm wasting my time, it's going to happen. And but we have the many children that you quoted, and we have getting on to 30 grandchildren, okay? So this is real. It's not something that we're doing for fun or what, it's real, it's very personal. And so that is the situation we face. But it's the situation that all other grandparents, grandfathers and grandmothers face in Kiribati. The same with the grandmothers and grandfathers in Tuvalu, in the Marshall Islands, in the islands of Tonga, which are lower lying, the islands of the Pacific country, and in beyond. And so that is why I've been coming here, being a pest to your government, and I'm not going to give up being a nuisance. Okay? I came here in 2022 to talk to your incoming government at the time, hoping that they might come in with some rational policy on climate change. And I recall my discussion with the minister. And he said, oh, we're going to do wonderful. We're going to cut to zero emissions by 2050. Is that it, Minister? What about your fossil fuel exports? Because Australia is the third largest fossil fuel export. And that is the domestic emissions are very, very small in comparison to what's exported. And the minister said, oh, that's not our problem. It's the problem of the countries that. I said, no, not good enough, Minister. Cannot be that. You've got to take responsibility. So I challenged the other minister. I said, so do you have a roadmap for transitioning away? And really, there is no roadmap. And so the question, and I think that I keep asking your governments, including the current government, because as your current government was coming in, we had high hopes that wonderful things would happen because we had been talking to the then opposition was now in government. They came to visit us in Kiribati. And we got high expectations that some really effective policies would come into place. I think it started off okay. But over the years, now they are beginning to approve new coal mines, new gas fields. And that is not the way to go. And the question that I keep asking myself, these people are obviously smart. They read the science, they know what they're doing is absolutely detrimental to structure. And even for their own citizens. So the question that I've never been able to answer is why? Why do they continue to do it? The answer that I've been given, I don't know how true it is, but I heard one of the well-known international commentators, the professor Jeffrey Sachs, is an American economist. He advises the US government in the past. And he says, he talked about what he called regulatory capture, where the people who are supposed to be regulated have actually captured the people who are supposed to be doing the regulating. In other words, the fossil fuel has taken over the governments. I don't know how people feel when they hear this, but there must be some truth, because I do recall when I wrote to all leaders, political industry leaders in 2012, calling on a moratorium of a global moratorium on the opening of new coal mines, to cease any opening of new coal mines. And I remember one of the bigger coal companies writing back to me and saying, "Oh, you're wasting your time. Coal will always remain the source of energy to the future." I won't say what company it was, but I remember getting very angry. I was going to reply, to vent my anger, but I was advised, don't waste your time. The fact that they are writing, they're worried. But that is now where we are with Australia. Regrettably, climate change has been and remains a political football. And that is so sad. Here in Australia, in New Zealand, in the United States, even in my own country. Even in my own country. It's so sad, but people have not come to the realization of the magnitude of what is coming. Whether they don't read the reports or just, I don't know what it is. Just today I was searching because, I wanted to know how long it took Noah to build the ark, okay? Because I'm sure in all of the time that he was building the ark, all of these people were laughing at him and saying, "You're wasting your time." But I'm sure at the final moments, I'm sure they all ran trying to get a board on a place on the ark. But I think this is what's happening here. On this, exactly the same thing that's happening on climate change. And so the point I've often made is this is not just a Pacific problem. This is an Australian problem. I remember speaking in Sydney in 2018, and I had quite a big audience. I was wondering, how do these people feel about what I'm saying? And I said, I'm sure that a lot of you listening to me now don't think what I'm talking about is relevant to your lives. But let's see what happens this coming summer. You know what happened in 2019, 2020. And I really regretted saying what I said. Have I just cursed Australia? It was not my intention, but I said, this is what the science has been saying. It's going to happen at some point in the future. And may happen, which it did happen 2019, 2020, the floods. So, the people of Australia don't need to look beyond, they don't need to look at us. You just need to look at what's happening here. The heat waves, we don't get the heat of 40 degrees in Kiribati. We are fortunate we got the surrounding water to cool us. But I've been in Adelaide, Perth, Melbourne, and the heat is here. And that's the beginning of what's happening. And so really the question is, what should the government, people ask me, so what do you think we should do? I said, well, I think one thing you need to do is you must have a government which cares and takes care and protects its people. That's the right thing. But because in doing so, it would also be addressing our issues. Maybe we won't be able to avoid what's happening, but at least it would give us a bit more time. and maybe the global community to come to terms with what is happening. And so, what can you as an individual do? You know, I joke, but I really wasn't joking. I said, make sure that the government you elect will do the right thing. I cannot understand why, knowing what they know, your successive governments continue to provide $11 billion annually subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. $11 billion. Why? Why do they not redirect this? I believe they should instead be taxing these fossil fuel companies, taxing them and giving the money to those people who need it. But all they could do now, I believe, if I was a leader in this country, I would just take the subsidy off, put it in the renewables, so that in the very near future, renewables will become cheaper as a source of energy and just substitute the dependence on oil. And so these are the things I've never been able to understand why apparently intelligent people are making the kind of decision that they are making. Unless, of course, there is the truth in that they've been captured. They are captive to those they're supposed to regulate. And that is really a very, very sad situation. What's happening to our democracy? What's happening to our humanity? Okay, let me stop there for the time being. I'm sure there are a number of points that people would want to ask more elaboration on, but it's I just want to make the point that Australia is now wanting to host the next COP and asking that the Pacific countries jointly. I think it's important that if you want the Pacific countries offer us something that is meaningful to dealing with addressing the challenge of climate change. Stop subsidizing your fossil fuels. Do not approve any more coal mines. Do something that would indicate that you are sincere in addressing this challenge. And allow us to work with you to decide the agenda so that it's not a token joint enterprise, that it is meaningful, that we are partners in this process. But above all, I think it is important that your governments must understand the responsibility to its own citizens, as well as its potential role in as a potential leader on the climate, on the fight against climate change. Now, I've often hoped that Australia would join us in this fight and lead us in this fight, but so far, it's not been it. Let me stop there for the time being. Thank you.
Okay, as I said, I'd like to ask a couple of questions to you. One thing is you came with us last year to the Torres Strait and got some visibility of other communities in Australia who are facing very similar issues to Kiribati. I guess one of the things that might be useful for everyone to know is a bit more. People think of the impact being rising sea level changes, but when we saw in the Torres Strait Islands, and when I went to Kiribati later in the year, I saw a very similar thing, was the many other impacts of climate change that are happening that are not as visible, but perhaps are in some ways even more impactful in the short term because of food security, water security, and other things. Perhaps you could talk a little bit more about that from the perspective of what's happening in Kiribati, but also to give a bit more visibility to them.
Again, I go back to the geographical structure of the islands that are at risk. We are very vulnerable, and so any change in whatever, even the weather. Okay, we talk about sea level rise, but I've always believed that it won't be the real challenge. The real challenge is when there should be a change in the weather patterns, because we create the cyclones that we send down to our friends in Fiji and Vanuatu, okay? Because they form on the equator and then spin off south or north. Okay, but in 2015, something happened which was very interesting. The storm that formed went south and to the east, destroyed Vanuatu in 2015. Cyclone Pam destroyed Vanuatu. And it should carry on going east and southward, but it didn't. It went back up north and flooded all of the islands of Tuvalu. Okay, the mothers and grandmothers were running around, panicking, looking. There were islets that disappeared. Okay, and hit our southern islands. Of course, the waves would come from one side and cross over into the lagoon. A lot of damage. And in the process, that is the more severe. But on a more frequent basis, we get this overtopping of the waves with the tides. And what it does is it erodes. You have to build a seawall. If you don't, if I didn't have a seawall in my front, my home would be gone. But what it also does is once the seawater overtops, the waves overtop, they destroy the freshwater lens, which is our source of livelihood. And so it remains brackish for a while. We wait for the heavy rain to flush it out. But if it doesn't, we drink highly saline water. Okay. And so those are the problems. The food crops are destroyed. And I've been reading a report by a group of researchers, okay, who say that the rate of buildup in the islands has been in what has matched the rise in sea level. I don't know, but I don't know. It doesn't match when there is a pressure change and there is a cyclone or whatever. It ignores all of that. But we have to deal with this on a daily basis. Every second week during the full moon and the new moon, we just wait. Is it going to be 2 meters or above 2 meters? If it's above 2 meters, we know there is going to be trouble. And if ever we have that a king tide coincide with a pressure difference somewhere, it's going to push the water up. Okay? And it's not about the marginal rise in global sea level. It's about the local weather patterns that's happening. If there should be a storm, then I can guarantee you, if we ever have a cyclone hit our islands, there will be nothing left. All the homes will be gone. And so that is, I believe, the most immediate danger. But it's not just about sea level. I've never believed that it's sea level that would be the problem. It's the other aspects of what climate change is going to do.
Might just take a second question, then open to the floor. Climate change, as you mentioned, since 2003, since you made your 2002, I should say, made your speech to the UN and brought it to the attention, has been a very unifying issue for the Pacific. Mm-hmm. I wonder, given all the other things that are happening at the moment in the region, whether you can reflect on whether this still is the case, that it is still the unifying position of an issue that brings the Pacific together, or whether there are other things that are drawing attention away from what should be a focus for the region and continued focus for the region going forward. But maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Okay. At the international level, we don't pretend that we can influence global issues. Okay, we accept that. We are small in comparison to the larger countries, and we never believed that we could or should make an impact on the wider global community. But on climate change, we had to. We could not continue to stand on the sidelines. And most certainly, it was an issue that not only the Pacific, but other equally challenged countries were able to get together and push at the international level, at the United Nations. I remember pestering the former Secretary General, what's his name, Kofi Annan, okay? I used to go and knock on his door. I want a meeting with the Secretary General. But I hardly ever did. I made his second man because, and the reason simply is because he's from Africa. And the problem in Africa is not sea level rise. It's international terrorism. Okay? So when Ban Ki-moon came, I kept pestering him. And he listened to me. And I even got him to visit Kiribati. And this is an interesting story. He came in 2011. And he went, take the man out. So he went around. By the evening, we had a meeting. He said, so what did you find, Mr. Secretary? Said, I've listened to you year after year. I never truly understood you. Now, not only do I understand, but I feel. You know? And I will do everything in my power to do what I can. But what he talks about his visit. What he never shared was throughout the time he was walking around visiting, his security people were carrying life jacket for him just in case the waves come over. Yeah. And so for him, you know, in the time when there was no high tide, he was feeling his security people felt threat. They needed to wait when the tide was actually pounding and threatening to come over. But yes, and there's no question about it. It remains the single greatest security issue in the Pacific, and this is why when I was here sometime a couple of years back, there was the AUKUS treaty, okay, and we wanted Australia. They had no money to deal with our climate issue, but just like that, they were able to find $364 billion, and for us it was disappointing. It was disappointing that. So the money was always there, but not for us, even though, and not only that, but Australia continues to provide assistance to build our resilience, but at the same time continues to do what it's doing that will destroy our climate resilience, you know, so much of change. So, but most certainly, climate change would be the one single uniting issue for the Pacific, because it threatens all of us. I visited villages in Fiji, which the cemetery is in the water, and the homes are getting flooded, and they've been relocated. So it is happening.
Gosh, there's so much to. I think we could speak for hours, but we'll take a few questions online and off the floor, if that's okay. Corinne will be taking any questions that come up. Yes, I did. Acknowledge my man. Thank you, Corinne. So, but perhaps a question off the floor. I might start with Pastor Ray and then come over to Glenn and.
Your Excellency, I was in Geneva last year at the World Trade Organization and hosted by the Canadian ambassador, lovely lady from Kiribati. I asked this of her question. I asked her what was the most serious issue that faced all humanity, thinking that she would say climate change, but she didn't. She said it was trust, the erosion of trust. And I felt that. I still do to this day, because I know we here in this
do what they are doing because they think they benefit by it and don't care what happens to the rest. And I think this is what it's all about, trust. I guess the reality is there are people that you must never trust. People who are so tied up with the dogma of capitalism, which is greed is great at any cost. And I think that in my moments of reflection, I think maybe it's our system that's brought us to where we are, you know, the capitalist mindset. You know, in our culture, I mean, it's wonderful to have possession, but it's not material that's the most important. It's people, okay? And so when I gave a talk once and I said, I think one of the problems in developed societies is you get these people, one person in a huge apartment. Nobody in the apartment when they go to work, they come back, it's just them and the cat, okay? In our society, you never live alone. You're always living with people and sharing. And so maybe this is a way of redistributing, reallocating resources so that we don't demand so much from this planet. But of course, the issue of trust, there are people who you simply cannot trust. You need to listen to some of these executives. And it's frightening the way they speak. They're so ruthless, they'll do anything to achieve what it is that they need to achieve in order to get the power and the wealth that they desire. Okay.
Okay, can we swap seats?
Yes, we can.
Because this is not a
Sure.
So we've got a question from Kesaya, from WWF. Vinaka Vakalevu, Excellency. If Australia's bid to host COP31 is successful, what is the role of Australian and Pacific civil society in driving meaningful outcomes from the COP?
I think Australia as a government is really under pressure. Perhaps they're not realizing this. And it's quite possible that as a government, they're hoping again to convince the Pacific Island countries to be a part of something which is really not, which really they're not a part of, okay? Because for the COP31 to be a meaningful event for the Pacific Island countries, it's got to come up with some very meaningful proposals. One, the cutback in the use of fossil fuel. And of course, this is against the huge subsidies that Australian government has been paying to the fossil fuel industry. Would it be able to redirect that? If they were to do that, it not only would it be a huge win for discouraging the use of fossil fuels, but I think it could save a lot of revenue, government revenue, to do some other good things. And so I think civil society, I know it's most likely, as the Pacific Elders' voice, we have said we shouldn't be part of something that is anything for us. I think it's, again, we're just repeating the colonial experience, you know, which is there to be used, utilized, and not being a part of what's going to happen. I think Australia really is under pressure to do something, and I hope they respond to that pressure. If they don't, I think it really indicates that they really don't care what happens. They're not genuine about what they're doing in terms in hosting an event like this, because the UNFCCC event is about doing something about climate change. It's not just a wonderful opportunity to bring in visitors so you can boost your tourism industry. It's not about that. It's about doing something very meaningful for dealing with climate change. And I hope this message is heard, and I hope that the government will act on this.
Thank you. Other questions?
We might go to the floor. I know that Glenn and Damien had a question, but can I also acknowledge Kathy Etok from First Peoples Organisation, who's also in the audience, and also to thank the Australia Institute who helped to bring Anote here today. He's here for other meetings, and so I just want to acknowledge the Australia Institute as well. But Glenn, maybe starting with you, and then.
Thank you, Your Excellency. My name is Glenn Gutowski from Climate Action Network Australia. We've had a bit of correspondence recently. For me, climate change is about the humans. And I watched a video, one of our interns did a project for us, and the video was from a group of Tuvaluans about creating a virtual Tuvalu. And it was devastating. You know, so that there's a digital record of the culture, the history, the geography, all of those things. And we see a proportion of the Australian population understanding the consequences of climate change and the existential. But we're not like people in Kiribati. What is that sort of society-wide grief? How does it manifest? What does it look like in a place like Kiribati?
You know, I'll be quite frank. As I said, even in Kiribati, climate change is politicized. When I was in office and advocating, and when the new government came in, they took it as a political thing and sort of jumped off. And I think to the disappointment of the region, because in a sense, we've been pushing on that issue. But quite frankly, I'd always been of the opinion that we tell the people, but we must overload them with it to the extent that they become so miserable, knowing what they will know, and fully understanding what's the future is for them, not only them, but their grandchildren, because it's a frightening possibility, because there is nothing they can do about it. And so this is why I was, in a sense, very obsessed in pushing for all the way, all the time, because it really poses, and it's the real danger. And I think we can never, we must never believe that there's nothing we can do about it. We feel that, because the simple reason is we have no option. And so what options do we have? And I've been advocating that we should build our resilience so that at least we have 1 or 2 islands. We could never have mobilized the resources to build up all of the islands we have. Never. I don't see that possibility. My objective was to build up 1 or 2 islands. Okay? And the rest, people will go there. We already have more than 50% of our population on South Taro, small area. So it is possible. And those that want to move, be given the opportunity to move. I think the recent agreement between Tuvalu and the Australian government was very interesting in the kind of response it got. But I was actually interviewed in Melbourne on that. And my response was this: there is no harm in that. Allow those people who choose to do so to do so. Those who don't want to do so, stay on. But at least there is that option. Because sometimes we are in a position to be able to travel, but we are saying, you can't travel because the rest cannot travel. They don't have the resources to travel. Okay? But they need the opportunities. And so to shut it off, I think it's not fair. Because what we have to come to terms with is all of our emotions, aspirations that we have today will not be relevant in the years, the decades ahead. For the simple reason that the world will be a different world. And we have to come to terms with that. We just need to project our mind. It will be a different world. I think the one thing that I always envision is and I always draw this Titanic analogy. My analogy is misinterpreted. Right? Why I refer to the Titanic, I refer to the Titanic in terms of the moral involved. Because there will be, as during the Titanic disaster, there were people in the boat, the lifeboat. There were people swimming. Okay? The question for those on the boat, are they going to pull those people on board, or are they going to push them away so they can remain comfortable? Yeah. Okay? And that was the moral challenge. And it's going to happen with climate change. Will those countries that will have to pull people on board do so? Or will they just look away and count them as collateral damage? You know, the canaries and the coal mine? A good warning. And that is the real moral challenge.
So this question follows on nicely from what you just said. A question from Christine, who's from a small Catholic NGO, who's part of the work of this NGO is to stop the exploitation of seasonal workers from the Pacific and Timor-Leste. Do you see global warming encouraging seasonal workers from the Pacific coming to Australia? And what can we do to assist seasonal workers in Australia?
Okay. Well, it's a moral question, isn't it? You know, good people don't do that to other people. Okay? It's wonderful. I think I had a part in working on that, on getting the seasonal work scheme going. So I've never thought that it's a bad thing. But of course, it's a great idea, but how it's done is not always perfect. And at the very early stages, when it started off in New Zealand, there were problems. I visited our workers in Marlborough doing the wine, the vineyards. And I remember seeing these boys and they said, "Oh, how are things? You know, this boss is a terrible human being. Why? He's always swearing at us." I said, "Oh, no, you got to understand. These kind of people, they don't know too much English. All they know is swear words." But it's the way they work. And I know that because I worked in the wharf when I was a young lad in Auckland before containerization. And all the language they need is every second word is a swear word. Said it's the way they talk, but it's they're not really, it's rude to say that. So all of that, what else is happening is there is exploitation, but I think it's about fine tuning it. I think that the problems have been identified. It's about eliminating them, but it doesn't. I wouldn't suggest that we scrap the scheme because our Pacific Islanders benefit. And the Australia as an economy benefits. I mean, we're getting a lot of fruit in the supermarkets now. But and again, it's not the idea, the concept is sound. But I think you will always find the rogues who will exploit and take advantage of that. And I think both sides, Australia and the Pacific Island countries, need to work this out.
Any question from Damien?
Thanks, Your Excellency. I'm Damien Spruce from the Edmund Rice Centre Advisory Committee and also from Caritas Australia. It's really interested to hear, we hear the moral and the ethical arguments around climate change a lot, but I think you touched on, and I'm interested to know your feelings about using national security and regional security arguments given the existential threats that are posed. And I ask you this because, some people say don't use those arguments, don't talk about that because that's the language of the military, that's the language of defence. Why should we be using these arguments around climate change?
Climate change is definitely a security issue. We tried very hard to push climate change onto the agenda of the United Nations Security Council. And this was the reason we helped our representatives in New York help Australia's appointment onto the non-permanent seat in 2012. For the Security Council to be for the climate change to be put on the agenda of the security. Do you know what happened? At the end of the term, the 1-year term, I read the terminal report. It was everything about the search for the Malaysian aircraft. Everything. Nothing, no word, single reference to the Pacific, no reference to climate change. But climate change is a single most threat to the Pacific security. And of course, this was why when the AUKUS issue came up, we said, so we understand that Australia and the United States have a different concept of security. I think don't forget that we look at it from a different perspective. And it's not about China coming in or out. It's about what you can do on climate change. And of course, how we relate to our partners is defined by what they do with us or against us. And so I don't know what, but it defines the relationship. What you do when we appeal for just something which we believe is very reasonable policies, which I believe is something that we can't avoid. Eventually, we would have to transition away from fossil. What we ask them, let's do it before it is too late for us.
Your Excellency, thanks for coming to Australia. It's nice seeing you here again. Your Excellency, you mentioned regulatory capture, and I remember when last time you came here, the time before, in about 2017, at Sydney University, there was quite a lot of discussion around that. And one of the professors there was actually, that's what their specialisation was. And I thought to myself, well, how can you overcome that? How can you overcome something so intrinsic to the structure of our political system? And the other thing, if you don't mind, I know you know Mary Robbins quite well. Lately, she's been talking about another thing that seems to be very intrinsic to the way we structure our society, which is short-termism. She talks about leadership needing to look beyond the horizon of the next elections. How can we do something about those two very basic confronting that doesn't allow things like climate change to really get to the focus of our politicians.
Yeah, I think, yes, you were with me on that occasion, yeah? No, I totally agree. I'm often in my speeches, I say, I think, don't trust political leaders. I'm retired from being a politician. Is that politicians, it's about what the point that Mary has referred to. Because I think, no, I know politicians always think about what? The next election, not the next generation. They don't do that. So again, the capture of the political leaders by the corporate entities, that also is an undermining of our current system of government, which we so espouse as being the best. So maybe democracy as concept is being challenged here. You know, what alternatives do we have? Because now, when and again, I go back to the experience that I had. When I was arguing against the fossil fuel industry on the science, I had Dr. Bachari being challenged, and of course, he's well versed in that. So he told this guy, no, that's rubbish. And so the science, the fossil fuel industry gave up on trying to invalidate the science. But then they disappeared, and I thought, good, they're gone. But they didn't. They just became more dangerous. And they wouldn't capture political leaders. When I came here in 2022, I came back very disappointed after my meeting with your political leaders. And I was talking to the Australian Institute people, said, why? What is happening? Of course, nobody says it outright, but they say, it's the money they get from these fossil fuels. Again, how do we deal with this? I think it's about time we find another way to, you know, I think our political system of governance has been overtaken by non-state actors, which have become more powerful than the state actors. And I think somebody has to come up with a new theory, political theory that works. The one thing that I know that works is have a dictator like Lee Kuan Yew, but not like Trump.
A good one.
A good one. Have a dictator who will do that, the right thing. But again, of course, there are hardly ever any good dictators. But,
You can suggest any?
I'm sorry?
Can you suggest some that would be appropriate to be?
No, I really don't have any idea, but I know that even the United Nations was being challenged as being as ineffective in dealing with climate change, for the simple reason that it cannot provide the regulatory regime that is needed in order to keep people in check. You know, if we light a fire there today, somebody will come and say, don't do that, it's not allowed. But you're burning fuel here. And your emissions are coming our way. We cannot come here and say, don't burn your fuel. Because the international regulatory system does not exist. And I'm sure that in all the negotiations, we think we're in control, but we're not. I'm sure the fossil fuel industry is there. So I don't know how to deal with this. I really don't. They're just too powerful, but
New generation.
regeneration.
New generation.
I think the new generation is, yeah. I think in the Caritas discussion which I had with the young people, and he said, what do you suggest we do? I said, go and find the sons and daughters of the executives in the fossil fuel industry, tell them that their parents are destroying their future. And if they don't listen, go and pick it in the front rows. But we need to target the right people. We are targeting governments. We need to target people, make them, because I believe two things, emotions dictate what we do. One is fear, and the second is greed. We can stimulate those two emotions in our favor, you know, frighten the executives and or offer them a better deal, and offer they cannot refuse.
I'm aware we're getting close to time, but we'll take one more question off the, I know there's been quite a few patient people online who've been wanting to ask a question, so I might ask if there was another question you mentioned.
Yes. There is another question. Actually, there isn't.
Okay, I thought there was one question.
Too close.
I think with that, I wanted to thank all of you for coming, but also to ask Corinne to speak a little bit, not just as a thank you to Anote, but also to give a little bit of an overview of the work that we do with the Pacifics, with Pacific Calling Partnership, and other things that we're doing, and maybe give an indication of what we've got planned for this year. Thanks, Corinne, over to you.
Thank you, LRP. Well, I want to re-acknowledge Maymay to start with, because I have this memory of being hosted by Maymay and Anote under the Maniaba, which is like a traditional meeting place in Kiribati, for your granddaughter's first birthday, I think. And it was a wonderful occasion. And for me, it speaks very strongly of the values of Kiribati and the Pacific more broadly. The values of family, of community, of interdependence on each other and with the ocean and the environment around us. And I say that when I think about this, I also relate that to what Anote spoke about, that this climate crisis isn't just an environmental crisis, it's really a crisis of values. It's a crisis with our capitalist values of greed and of money that have come to rule our Western society. And it's also a crisis for our democracies in the West and the way they operate. And I think in this way, we have a lot to learn from Kiribati and from the Pacific. And certainly in my journey at the Edmund Rice Centre, working for the Pacific Calling Partnership, you know, it has been a very transformative journey for me to be exposed to those values. I want to thank Anote, really, you know, a heartfelt thanks for keeping on. Because Anote has done this so many times and keeps on coming back to Australia and talking about what is happening to his people and his homelands. And this is a very personal thing for Anote. And I do believe that it mustn't be an easy thing to have to keep doing that. And I can also hear the disbelief in your words, especially in, you know, more recent years, Anote, that the science is well known, but nothing, you know, it's just not moving fast enough. And the politics aren't moving fast enough. And I can certainly hear the disbelief and the how can this be happening or not happening? So I just really want to thank you. Your voice in Australia is incredibly important. And the voices of the Pacific Elders Voice Group are incredibly important. They are inspiring to us and motivational, and they play a very important role in the Australian climate movement. So thank you, and thank you to the Australian Institute for bringing you this time. The Pacific Calling Partnership was established in 2006 when Anote was actually president of Kiribati, and it started in Kiribati. The church and the orders, the Good Samaritans, and Jerry's here, Sister Jerry, was involved right from the start, actually put out a call for solidarity from Australia because of climate impacts that were happening in Kiribati. And that's really how the Pacific Calling Partnership was born. And the Pacific Calling Partnership since 2006 has been about promoting the voices of Pacific Islanders on climate change, really, and helping to create opportunities for advocacy. So we see this role is needed more than ever today, with the concept of COP31. We don't know if Australia has been successful in its bid yet, but really we see the importance of elevating Pacific Islander voices is needed more than ever with this COP. We do not want this COP, and it cannot be, it cannot result in no outcomes for the Pacific in terms of climate change. Pacific voices must be at the core of this COP if Australia wins the bid. How do we do that? This is an important question for the entire climate movement and indeed beyond. So that's something that we will certainly continue to work on as we get closer to that COP. I want to thank all of you for attending online. Thank you. And also in person. It's a pleasure to have you. And we'll be, for those in the room, having a little bit of a very humble afternoon tea. But Anote will be staying. So please feel free to come up and introduce yourselves, have a chat. And we're really very honored to have you all at the centre today. And thank you so much. Thank you, Ray, for your acknowledgement of country, and Kathy for coming, and all of you. I hope that there'll be more such events in the rest of the year. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
Online viewers, thank you for attending, and enjoy the rest of the day and the weekend, and safe travels if you'll travel.
Okay.
Malo.